We just wanted to give a quick heads up to you, the listener, as you proceed through this episode and discussion with Danny, that we did experience some technical difficulties on our end with the audio. On Danny's end, it was perfectly fine. And you will see that this is a fascinating conversation, and we will probably have him back on.
In my capacity as the former general counsel of the Jesuit Social Ministry Office, what I did is I reached out. I contacted Father Jose Gabriel Funes within the first 2 minutes of our conversation. He said, look, Dan, we're not talking here about discovering some single cell life form under some frozen sea on some distant moon of a planet in some far off galaxy. We're talking about another highly intelligent, highly technologically developed, but distinctly non-human species right here in our Milky Way galaxy. And so I took it upon myself at that point to start figuring out how I would be able to assist in facilitating the convening of this set of conversations among our people that we have to have in order to adjust to this. And so that has brought me since that time up to this point now, where I am fortunately participating in helping to nominate the individuals who are going to make up a 9-member board of review that is going to be appointed by President Biden at the beginning of 2024 to extract from every single one of the U.S. military services and every one of the 18 intelligence agencies and all of the agencies and departments of the Defense Department, as well as the U.S. government contractors who have any information whatsoever about the UFO phenomenon and the potential existence of extraterrestrial or non-human intelligence that is operating these UFOs. And that they're going to be, all of these agencies are going to be required to turn over this information to this board.
All right. Welcome to another installment of Behind Greatness by Inspire. It's Luciano here speaking as your host. Before we get into this next conversation that we have with a special guest, wanted to, as usual, just to remind the listener, if you haven't already shared, if you haven't already rated, please do so. This is how we have been growing. I've said this many times. I'll continue to say it, and we're excited by the fact that you're listening in fact, that you are sharing. And if you're not, we're excited by the fact that you've decided to share after this reminder. Last thing as well, our regular listeners know, of course, that we have been a not-for-profit for 12 years and also a registered charity. We all give our time here. We all volunteer our time. We all have our businesses to run. And we do this for the fun of gaining more knowledge, perspective on the bigger questions in life from people all over the world. So our regular listener already knows this. If you're a new listener, you will undoubtedly find this out in the next few minutes. So for anybody who wishes to help donate, to help the cause, our mission, to asking and finding some answers to the what ifs and why nots, just go to our website, behindgreatness.org, and you can see where you can donate. Very, very easy. So again, here we go. We're joined by Danny Sheehan. Danny joins us from his home in California, right? It's in Northern
Santa Cruz.
Santa Cruz.
We're right at the university because we teach here in the spring quarter each year at the University of California.
One of the many things that you already do that we'll be discussing too. So Daniel Sheehan, he is a Harvard College, Harvard Law School, and Harvard Divinity School trained constitutional litigation attorney. For close to 5 decades, Danny's worked as a federal civil rights attorney, author, public speaker, and college and law school educator. He has been at the center of many of the most important legal cases and social movements of our generation, including one of the most well-known cases. The Cahill Gordon law firm was a landmark First Amendment case, New York Times versus US, the Pentagon Papers case, in which New York Times won the right for it and the Washington Post to publish a classified Pentagon study revealing the secret history of the Vietnam War. That's an example. Another one was a Wounded Knee case, the Watergate burglaries. He also represented John Mack. We'll go into that in a little bit. And he is also the co-founder of the Paradigm Institute. We'll also go into that. And the last note, I didn't want to forget here, going back to the John Mack case, that wasn't the first time. So I'm reading this from a partial bio as well. It wasn't the first time they came into contact with the issue of the potential of extraterrestrial intelligence. In 1977, Danny served as a special counsel to the U.S. Library of Congress investigation into the existence of ET that had been expressly requested by then President Jimmy Carter. Following that work, he was invited to present a 3-hour closed door seminar on the theological implications of contact with ET intelligence to top 50 scientists assigned to the SETI project, which is the search for ET at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. This is just an example of some of the things he's doing kind of on the side of what he has always been involved in doing the last 5 decades. So I guess the reading and the butchering of your 17-page bio into this 2-minute thing, Danny, should explain anyway why we want to talk to you. So thanks for coming on to the program.
Terrific. I appreciate it, John.
So there are many ways to get started. You wanted to be an astronaut, not a
Yes.
lawyer.
Yes.
Why?
Well, when I graduated from high school in 1963 in New York, I was one of the top 5 candidates in the state for the senatorial nomination to the United States Air Force Academy because I wanted to be an astronaut and get to participate in what I thought was the most extraordinary period in recent history when our whole human family was going to be traveling out into outer space and actually searching for life elsewhere. We're, as you know, right now actively engaged in that process. Just actually, 5 days ago, the first planet was discovered by the James Webb Telescope, space telescope, that's K218b. It's in the constellation of Leo. It's 8.6 times the size of the Earth and mass of the Earth, and it has been found to have carbon dioxide in its atmosphere, along with dimethane sulfate, which are chemicals that are generated only by living matter. And so that we're actually, as we're talking today, we may be less than 1 week from the time of the first discovery of direct evidence of life elsewhere in the universe. And we're also, and of course, I'm in conversations met with some of the people from the U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops last week. We're in the process of discussing with the Catholic Church, because I served for 10 years as general counsel at the United States Jesuit headquarters in Washington, D.C., in their social ministry office. And that is where I was when I was first contacted and asked to serve as special counsel to the President Carter's investigation of UFOs and ETs. So I've been at this for some time, but I started out is when I was only 18 years old, wanting to participate in this particular process. It's taken a while to get us to this stage.
Become an astronaut, you mean? You're not an astronaut yet?
Well, not yet. No, I'm figuring that I'll be lawyers to the a lawyer to the astronauts,
Yeah.
or a lawyer to the ET program.
Mhm.
We're working on that now. In fact, I've been involved in helping to select the 9-person board of review that's being appointed by President Biden right at the beginning of 2024 to review all of the evidence and information that our entire United States government and all of our government contractors have that we've obtained since January 1st of 1945 to make this available to people. So that's one of the things I'm engaged in actively right now.
So maybe the brains of some of our listeners are going kapow because I asked you about why astronaut, and you've
Yeah.
given us quite a bit to munch on that seemingly is unrelated. But I want to touch upon all those things in our
Yeah.
conversation. I've made this promise to myself, not to you,
Mhm.
to myself. Uh, but bring us, because I want you to uh, close the story on why you chose to go the legal route and what happened. 'Cause I thought that was
Well,
a pretty good story.
oh yeah, it is. Well, what happened is when I was 18 years old in 1963, in May of 1963, I was contacted by Senator Jacob Javits, who was the United States Senator from New York State, and notified that I was one of the top five candidates in the state of New York for the senatorial appointment. And he invited me to come down to New York City to interview him for his potential appointment to the U.S. Air Force Academy. So I went down. And he asked me, why I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy. And I told him that I wanted to become an astronaut. And he said, oh, yes, it's 1963, John Glenn, everybody, all young men want to be an astronaut. And he said, so why do you want to be an astronaut? And I said, well, I think this is the most exciting time in history. We're getting set to travel into outer space, and we're going to get a chance to actually discover life elsewhere in the universe and get to actually engage potentially during my lifetime, with an entire extraterrestrial civilization. And he looked kind of shocked, and he said to me, this is 1963, he said, "You actually believe that there's an extraterrestrial civilization?" I said, "Well, sure. I mean, so do you. I mean, you're a United States senator. You have to realize that's going." And he was taken aback by that, and he said that. Well, he said, "Look, Dan, I didn't expect this degree of candor, I guess, in the conversation. But let me be clear." He says, "Look, I've had to give the appointment to the Air Force Academy, my appointment, senatorial appointment in New York, to a person he's actually the son of one of my major financial supporters in my campaigns." He said, "But look, I'll give you the appointment to the Naval Academy. You can go to the Naval Academy." And I said, "Well, I'm not into boats, I'm into airplanes. I'm into flying." And he said, "Well, you can fly in the Navy." And I said, "No, but I want to go to the Air Force Academy and be an Air Force officer." And he said, "Well, okay, look, you can get the appointment from your congressional representative. There's 42 congressmen here in New York, and they give 42 appointments. And like I should tell you, you're actually number one in New York State." He said, "And so that you'll definitely get the appointment from your congressman." And so he said, "Who is your congressman?" I said, "It's Carlton King." He said, "Oh, I know Carlton King. I'll give him a call. Make sure you get that appointment." So I'd assumed I was going to go to the academy. And he said, "Look, Dan, to tell you a secret," he said, "after you've been in the academy for a year, it doesn't make any difference really whether you got the senatorial appointment or from one of your congressmen." He said, "So don't worry, it'll work." And so I went back home expecting to get the congressional appointment. It turns out that Congressman Carlton King gave the appointment to the kid who was number 7 in our congressional district in New York, who happened to be the son of the Republican mayor of Glens Falls. And I realized that, wait a second, I said, "Wait a second, there's something wrong here. That the way that our government is supposed to be functioning, this seems to be like a little out of tune here." And so I guess I'll have to, and I hadn't applied to any other schools
Mhm.
because I was just
You didn't think you
confident.
needed to. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't need to. I thought I was just going to go to the Air Force Academy. And so the bottom line is that I said, I guess I'll just have to become a lawyer for a while and figure out what I can do to help get the government functioning back in tune. And then I'll get back to this and get back to being an astronaut. It should only take a short while, and I'll still be young enough to go to the academy. And well, it turns out that when I got into actually practicing law, I realized that our government wasn't just a little bit out of tune. It was playing an entirely different song than we'd been taught in high school civics, and so I became dedicated to working at trying to get our United States government to function, to our Constitution being functional. And I've been at this now for over 50 years. And so that's how I ended up being involved tangentially now in the issue of extraterrestrial exploration, but that I'm not yet been invited to go into outer space yet.
Yet, yet. but
Yes.
you do have to represent the civilization sooner or later. So
Yes.
you might need to do that. Okay, let's fast track a little bit, and maybe we'll do a little bit of back and forth in terms of timeline. Because when we chatted last, I mean, I was fascinated by the your trajectory, but the different branches, the paths that you've taken in your life. Um, I would have spent much more time with you if you had allowed it.
Mm,
So we're going to see if we can go in a little bit deeper in some of those things now, and we'll see where this
sure.
goes. Um, so fast forward a little bit in your career, you're at about 30. So you had already been involved in the Watergate scandal, Watergate burglary case, and a
Hmm.
couple of others. Um, and you were invited to be general counsel to the Jesuits in the U.S.
Yeah.
to represent the Jesuits.
Mhm.
Uh, and you did that. And for the listener, and tell me if I'm off base when I say this. For the listener, you grew up Catholic, you've been Catholic, and you are a practicing
Yeah.
Catholic.
Sure. Yep.
Okay. Um, so you said yes to the Jesuits.
Yeah. Yeah, I did.
Why did you say yes?
Well, it's interesting. That I was at Harvard Divinity School. I'd been out practicing law for a number of years and realized that a substantial majority of the lawyers that I was encountering, in every facet, not only in the private field, but in U.S. attorneys' offices and the judges and all, that, they were not, in fact, performing in accordance with the constitutional principles. And so I would have kind of fundamental debates with them going on all the time. One of whom was F. Lee Bailey, who was the kind of major criminal defense attorney in the country. Everybody knew him more than anyone else, and he had asked me to come and work with him on the Watergate burglary. That we were representing James McCord, who was the former CIA wiretapping specialist, and he's the one that wrote the letter to Judge Sirica blowing the whistle on the plumbers in Richard Nixon, actually, that led to his removal from office, basically, his resignation. And so I'd been working at that, and we got into this major debate, myself and Lee Bailey, about what the purpose of what we were doing was. And I ended up uh, finding the book of John Rawls, who was the head of the Department of Philosophy at Harvard University, called A Theory of Justice. And in that book, he laid out the fact that there were two basically different schools of thought functioning in Western civilization uh, regarding the issue of justice, one of which was the strictly utilitarian uh, school of ethics, where people pursued what was the most effective thing in their own direct interest, or even more extensively in the interest of theoretically the majority of the people.
Hmm.
Uh, but there was but what Rawls said in his book, A Theory of Justice, he said, look, if that were in fact the guiding mode of ethical reasoning for our government, then, as he put it in the book, the 90% of the people in the country that are white would still own the 10% of the people that are black. He said, and that isn't true because there's this other school of thought functioning, which he referred to as the intuitionists. And the intuitionists would say things like, all men are created equal, they're endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. And they'll go on and start elucidating these: free speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, etc. And he said, so that there are these two competing schools of thought. So I went to talk to him about this set of arguments I was having with a number of the people in the bar association, and he invited me to come back to Harvard to do a master's degree and PhD degree in comparative social ethics, comparing and contrasting these different modes of ethical reasoning that people pursue in the world. And so one of the courses that I took there at Harvard Divinity School was a course called The Theological Underpinnings of Human Rights. It was taught by Father Roger Couture. And when we got done with the course, and I had gotten an A+ in the course, and he called me in and said, look, the papers that you've been writing in this course, I was waiting till the course was over and the grades were all in, but I've been fascinated by this. He said, are you aware of what the Jesuits are doing right now? And I said, no, I'm not. He said, well, the Superior General of the Jesuits, Pedro Arrufe, has called all 100 provincials of the Jesuit order in the world back into Rome for a major conclave where they're discussing social justice. And they're going to be establishing a new headquarters in Washington, D.C., and they're looking for a general counsel. Would you be open to being interviewed for that position? And so I said, sure. I said that would be interesting. That's what I'm doing is social justice stuff. And I figured that would be a great client to really represent
Mhm.
because I'll come to the conclusion that I could basically win for virtually any case that I chose to undertake on whichever side. And so I wanted to be on the right side and I wanted to have a client that was dedicated to doing things that I thought were strategically important. And so I agreed to be interviewed. And Father William J. Davis came to interview me. He actually came to interview me because I was up at Akwesasne. I was up at the five Indian nations at that time because I'd been asked to go up and help negotiate a major conflict that was going on. Because at that time I'd been asked to become legal counsel for the Native American
That's
Rights Committee.
the Wounded
Crazy.
Knee case that we
Yeah.
described, right? The
This
Wounded
was
Knee case?
following the Wounded Knee case
Yeah.
in '73, where I was legal counsel for the ACLU in the Wounded Knee trials out in '73. And so this was 1975, and I was asked to go up to New York because there was a similar confrontation brewing up there between the Mohawk people
Mhm.
and the state of New York. So I was up there, and Father Davis came all the way from Washington up to northern New York to interview me there. And he he was actually waiting for me when I came out of a major sweat with the five medicine men of the five Indian nations. And he said, "That's it." Said, "You got it. If you want the job, it's yours." So
That's
I said,
awesome. That's
"Yeah,
awesome.
that was a good interview." And so anyway, so I went down to Washington, D.C., and
So you
and
left, sorry to interrupt, you left a mystical place, so like a mystical practice, literally,
yeah,
into a religious order.
that's right. That's right. So I went down to Washington and became general counsel in the National Social Ministry Office,
Hmm.
and I was responsible for formulating potential public policy positions for all 15 of the major cabinet level positions in the United States government and all 8 of the major federal agencies, and promulgating particular policies. And that's how we ended up litigating a number of issues.
So you were 30 years old. So it doesn't
Mhm.
surprise me by listening in, or it shouldn't surprise by the listener either, listening into your story when you were 18 years old and speaking so candidly to a senator who had a role in choosing a path in your life. So at 30, you now entered a world of high stakes politics and entered a world of world religions,
Yes.
politically speaking. Um,
Yes.
so I had asked you, it's actually pretty cool what you said to me. So tell me if I'm off here too. I typed it out as fast as I could when you did say it to me. Because when I asked you the first time, like, why, you gave me a shorter answer. I mean, this is good. The background that you gave here is great for the listener. And you
Mhm.
said you became aware of so you were 30. You became aware of the fact that there was an effort underway to elucidate to people that there is something extraordinary going on.
Uh-huh. Yes.
What is that extraordinary thing that you thought at 30 was going on?
Well, there were a few things but the most important thing, and the reason that I was at the Jesuit headquarters is that it's our human family. That I had actually gone to a lecture by Professor Crane Brinton at Harvard. Uh, it was his final lecture after almost 40 years of teaching intellectual history at Harvard University, and I went to his lectures in the spring, May of 1968 when I was over at the Harvard Law School, and he was teaching back at the college across the street. So I went back over there for the lecture, and he was asked to address in his final lecture what he thought the most important single intellectual insight was that our human family had reached, that he had encountered in his over 50 years of studying in the field. And he announced that he said, well, "This is easy." He said in his final lecture, he said, "I believe that all the greatest minds in our human family have come to the conclusion that our human family is right on the brink of taking its next step in biological evolution. And that this next step in biological evolution was going to be giving rise to the full manifestation of another faculty, like seeing or hearing. Uh, he said, and that by means of this other faculty, each human being was going to be able to directly, experientially encounter the unitive phenomena that bonds every single ultimately irreducible integer of matter in the entire physical universe into one unified, harmonious whole. And by means of this experience, which is direct and unreflected on, like seeing or hearing, each individual was going to be able to discern what conduct on the part of human beings, either individual or collective, is either harmonious with or disharmonious to the natural order of the universe. And I said, now that is something.
That's profound stuff.
And then he just closed his notes and walked away. And that was that.
He
Oh,
walked
and
away.
he actually said to us before he closed it, he looked at us and he looked out at all the guys that were there. I was in the last all male class at
Yeah.
Harvard University out of 350 years, right? He looked out on this whole array of men that had come from all around the world to come here for his last lecture. And he closed his book and he said, and I think that that's why so many of you young men in this generation refuse to go and fight in the Vietnam War.
Wow.
That's what he said, and then walked away. And so I ended up becoming not only involved in, but becoming one of the instrumental attorneys in getting the Pentagon Papers published by the New York Times, the 47 volumes. I was the one who happened to receive the telephone call from Jim Goodell, who was the vice president and general counsel of the New York Times, when they got the 47 volumes of the New York Times from Dan Ellsberg. And so he called me because I had initiated the case that established the right of journalists to protect their confidential news sources.
No
When I
brainer.
when I was still at Harvard Law School, we had initiated that case on behalf of an NBC television journalist. We asserted that for the first time ever, the right of an American journalist to protect the identity of his or her confidential news sources.
That's
So
a
we had
surprise
won
to
that.
me. So
Yeah.
before that case that you were on, that did not exist.
No,
That protection did
that
not exist.
no, there was
Yeah,
no recognition of it at all.
I was
And
born into a world where, I mean, I'm a little younger than you, so I was born into a world that I took that for granted, I suppose. Eh?
yes, yeah, that's the advantage in winning at a Supreme Court level. The future, people take it for granted
Sure.
because it has been granted. I took the position that it isn't something that is granted; it's just something that's recognized finally. That it has always existed. The right has always existed. It's a matter of natural law, but it's up to us to get the juridical structures of the country to recognize it. And so I had already we had done that case. I initiated that case off the Harvard Civil Rights Law Review, and so that was why I got recruited to go to the number one corporate litigation law firm in the world out of Harvard Law School. They came and recruited me to go to their firm because they represented NBC News, and
Mm.
so I went there, and I had done the briefs at the Supreme Court level, not only for NBC but for ABC and CBS, and for the New York Times and the Washington Post. They filed amicus briefs in that case. So I got to know Jim Goodell. So when they got the papers, they got the papers, he called me and asked if we would represent him.
Let me insert something here, as I want to go back to your experience, actually move forward to your experience with the Jesuits, because you said something that also made me ponder about the mission. Mission is my word, but the mission of the Jesuits is to lead a life where there is reflection, but not just reflection, to a point where you can receive. You use the word downloads.
Yeah, yeah,
Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
yeah. There's an experience that human beings are capable of accessing uh, through certain meditative practices and dietary habits and habits of abstention from certain conduct that is super stimulating to your system. and that, in the Eastern traditions of Buddhism and Hinduism, it's primarily sitting meditation.
Mhm.
In the history of the Catholic Christian Church, it's meditation similar in the monks, etc. In the Trappists, for example, and some
Yeah.
of the Franciscans. But the Jesuits have a thing they call the Ignatian spiritual exercises, in which, in addition to sitting in meditation and what they call prayer, but it's in meditation, you place yourself in certain visual and sensory situations in your mind, and absorb the experience of where you are at that time, and you you sit open to a download from the universe of this unitive experience that Crane Britton talked about, and that in that context you can experience how it is that a human being who is conducting himself or herself uh, in a state of transcendent consciousness, in which one rises above and transcends one's initial genetic predisposition of the physical body that you're in, the astrological predilections that have been imposed upon you by your genetic or of your biological evolution under a certain matrix of astrological influences. Also, the cultural influences that you've been subjected to during your
Mhm.
upraising,
Mhm.
and you can get into a transcendent state of consciousness where you transcend those instinctive, physiologically stimulated responses to the situation. Whereas if you're in this transcendent state, you can actually get a completely objective perspective on what it is that ought to be done, what kind of action you should engage in, if any, in that situation. And it's called the Ignatian spiritual exercises. And that's what we practiced in the Jesuit order. I was a candidate for the Jesuit priesthood for 10 years. And,
But
pardon?
but
But well, I was trying to get them to explain to me why women were theoretically not authorized to engage in this conduct and become members of the Jesuit order,
Hmm.
and why. I mean, I understood that through a long period of meditation and abstention, that one can get into a state where one, in a sense, transcends the kind of instinctive, reflexive action of wanting to engage in sexual intercourse with virtually almost anybody who's willing to do it with you
Hmm.
at the most primitive level. All the way up to a place where you, in a sense, kind of transcend that kind of instantaneous reflexive response to a kind of a biophysical stimulation. Uh, and but I said that I realize that that's not a place where most people, men or women, are at when you're trying to invite them into the priesthood,
Mhm.
uh, but imposing it upon them arbitrarily generates a great deal of tension and trouble. And so that I thought that they ought to be open to having people who were married be able to also be Jesuit priests, both men or women. And their response was, "Oh, that issue." Yeah. And so I said, so I'm not going to agree to become a Jesuit priest until such time as I have some better understanding of what it is that you're doing here, of you're excluding people from serving. If you think it's so important to be in service to the human family, but you're excluding people from the kind of training and access that you can provide
Mhm.
as members of the Jesuit order, why you're not doing that. Uh, and so, but eventually, I ended up meeting Sarah Nelson, who was the National Labor Secretary for the National Organization for Women. She was the one running the Karen Silkwood case that we did. I was chief counsel in the Karen Silkwood case that stopped the construction of all private nuclear power plants in the United States.
Hmm.
Uh, and she was the one who generated that project out of the National Organization for Women, and they reached out to me at Jesuit headquarters and asked if I would become lead counsel for the Silkwood family, and we did. We won the $10.5 million judgment, and we stopped the construction of the private nuclear power plants because we got declared unconstitutional the financial limit that had been put on money judgments that could be won against a nuclear power plant. It was put on by Congress. And so that we got that declared unconstitutional as a violation of the Sixth Amendment right to counsel. So they couldn't insure those plants anymore. And so that's how we did that. So I met Sarah Nelson, and we worked together throughout the entire period of the Karen Silkwood case. We then had Danny Paul, our older boy, who is today taking his LSAT test, his law
Nice.
school aptitude test, and Dagan, our younger boy, who's in 1 week, going to be starting his senior year at UCSC in Santa Cruz here.
Mhm.
So we've, and we've conducted together a life of public service for people that have engaged in dozens of cases for Native American people at Standing Rock. That we just were involved recently in winning the case in the United States Supreme Court, declaring the Indian Child Welfare Act to be constitutional, even though it gives preferential placement to Native American kids with Native people. That's not a violation of the racial discrimination. We do these cases. We've done them for 50 years together as partners, and I think it stands as a model to the Jesuit order, into the Catholic Church, into others that people can in fact work as partners with people to have a full private life with children and still serve the human family. So that's what we did.
In a sense, it's a different version of shamanism, because that's what I had in my head when you were describing what the Jesuits, what their mission was when I first asked you the question. In a sense, that is opening yourself up to service indiscriminately. So that's obvious by the cases that you've run and won together
Yes.
with Sarah, that's the case. Back to the question about downloads before we
Yeah.
move on, because I don't want to forget it.
Sure.
You also said that you practice meditation. I don't know if it's because of that experience with the Jesuits or not, but you said you also get downloads as well.
Well, one has to be careful about this. It's
Yeah.
what it really is. It's more of a dissolving away of the strictures that get imposed upon one's unconditioned consciousness. Is what actually occurs. Is that in meditation, in the breathing exercises and the meditation of placing oneself in certain what I've done, what I do is I actually go through a process. It's just a 30-minute process of sitting in complete silence and breathing and chanting. I have a particular mantra that I was given by actually Baba Muktananda. uh, that it's just the classic Om Namah Shivaya. It's nothing great insight, but the bottom line is that when you chant and breathe this, you can get into a state where uh, you start to transcend the kind of sensory experiences of your body and the time and place that you are, and you can place yourself in a situation that is consistent with some of the primordial chakra energy systems in your body, to be specific. Uh, in that that's what you do, and you run through this process in your meditation where you're basically assisting in the falling away of conditional restrictions that are imposed upon your consciousness by
Hmm.
your place and situation. And you run through these archetypal situations in your consciousness until you transcend them and you're in a state of ultimate unity initially with the entire cosmos, and then ultimately out in out and away from the physical perimeters of the physical universe into the field of complete, infinite and eternal, undifferentiated consciousness that abides out beyond the sum total of mass and energy that make up the universe. And it's in that state of consciousness that one can then, it's not like a download, it's an unload. You're
Ah,
unload you're unloading yourself from all those, conditioned restrictions that are imposed upon your physical, body
I,
and mind.
I like the word unload, because in the unloading, you are opening yourself up to the expansiveness of um, what you didn't think, and I use that word underline and bold, think existed.
Right,
And so you're not thinking, and
right,
which is opposite to what you do for a living, which is thinking and thinking things through.
right. Yeah, what it is that it engenders a sort of an unconditioned perspective,
Yeah.
from which you can then attempt to engage your linear, capacities, your linear faculties of intellect, and try to figure out what the pathway is from this place of conditioned perception into kind of coordinating the activities of yourself as an individual and those over whom you have any influence, and ultimately our human family, into conducting ourselves both individually and collectively, in harmony and in resonance with the natural order of the universe, that there's a certain natural law that functions in the universe, uh, and it manifests itself in various, subtle and less subtle forms. But once you can discern what the matrix is
Mm.
of all of these interacting forces, you can then determine how you're going to act and how you're going to advocate that others act. That's the difference in what the profession as an advocate is. In addition to just conducting oneself personally, I actually openly advocate that others conduct themselves in a particular way.
Use your voice, advocate. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, but maybe the understanding of this could make us realize that anything linear or a singular pathway shouldn't exist. It is not natural, because the open state of the cosmos is not linear. It's interconnected. I'm not
Mm,
going to say shapeless. That's actually wrong. So maybe we'll edit that
that's
out,
right.
because I
No,
thought shapeless, but
no,
um, the shape the shape of the cosmos is one that reflects how we should act, and that is in unison, and that's impossible with with our bodies and five senses. There are
well,
always boundaries that we have. There's always a
yeah,
linear path that we have.
sure. No, that's right. And so it's the interrelationship between this state of unconditioned consciousness, inside a biophysical vehicle, an
Yeah,
energetic vehicle which is, inherently conditioned,
limited.
by your, yeah, it's limited. And so that you try to move toward that kind of conduct that would be engaged in by a a perfectly unconditioned consciousness. And then that's what the avatars and the mystics and the others, try to achieve. And so a lot of them a lot of them just walk around being, and they kind of radiate this kind of energy field that cause other people, when they become exposed to it, to go, wow, look at this. There's something happening here. There's a person in a kind of a transcendent state of consciousness that is like a tuning fork, that if you could just sort of get into that kind of resonant frequency, that you could experience the same kind of, uh, motivations and, that this person has to help others and be kind and compassionate and loving and caring, and helpful to the, people of the world.
That's wonderful. You said being. So people who you see that are just being, because those people, in my limited experience, limited, so it's very personal. The folks that I have found who I see just be are mostly artists. And we're not talking about successful artists. We're just talking about artists. Right? We're not labeling. There are no adjectives, just artists. So people who live through their art, because they also advocate the sense of being through their art, and that
Yes.
that's what makes them attractive to people, because there's no limit, there's no linear thinking, there's no thinking, but there are no limits to, there's no containership to it.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
they
that's right. I was just discussing this with Danny Paul, our older son, the other day, uh, in that the art in its pure form is a subjective expression on
mm,
the part of the artist of a specific state of consciousness, and it interacts with whatever they're experiencing visually, and their perspective is conveyed by their art, whether it's art, whether it's painting or music or an instrument of some sort. That it's a flowing forward out into the world of an innermost felt experience, and that others, when they're exposed to it, there's kind of a sympathetic resonance that is established kind of vibrationally with the, and you can experience the internal state of consciousness of the artist. That's, in my opinion, what happens.
sympathetic resonance, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah, because that's where the understanding is, that we all understand through an artistic endeavor the beauty of it. All of us do, and whatever it is, like you said, music, painting, writing, whatever.
Mhm.
It reminds me of something I just read this morning. There's an article written about an artist, a sculptor, who we're going to have on the podcast soon. I keep saying soon. It's been about a year, but and his name is Jago. He's Italian. And the title to this thing, I'll forward it to you if you want later, is
Mhm.
translated to English is, in order to sculpt anything, you have to break something. It just that blew my mind, because it's so simple, but yet you have to be prepared to break, to shatter, to not think, because in a sense, it's the thinking that keeps us contained. Uh, so let me use that as a segue to the story, because I don't want to forget this story either. Story you told me about 2009,
Oh,
when you heard something and then you flew over to the Vatican to
yeah,
get it by the horse's mouth.
yeah, yeah,
Can you
yeah.
bring us? Can you bring us to that story?
Sure. What happened is in November of 2009, uh, yeah, the Pope Benedict, not the most progressive of all popes in history, who had been formerly the head of the doctrine of the faith, that is kind of the hammer and enforcer of
Hmm.
rigid doctrines. Uh, he convened at Castle Gandolfo, outside of Rome, where the papal observatory is, a cadre of scientists from around the world, astrophysicists, biophysicists, others, uh, and brought together members of the Vatican to go out to Castle Gandolfo to meet with these scientists for over a period of a whole week to discuss the issue of the quest for discovering extraterrestrial life in the universe, for the Vatican officials and the Pope to start reflecting upon this, because they wanted to figure out what the state of progress was in this quest that was underway. Because as you will recall, the church, when back at the time of Galileo and Copernicus, had rigidly attached themselves to the fixation that our physical planet was located in the geographic center of the entire universe, uh, and that when Copernicus and Galileo challenged that, and said that it was clear from their empirical studies that our planet actually revolved around the sun, and that the sun was a part of a larger system in the universe and the galaxy, and that our Earth was not the center of the universe, and therefore our species was not the centermost phenomenon in the universe in all reality. And the church responded by suppressing them at that time. And so we were the church officials realized that we were approaching a moment in our human family that was going to be clearly analogous to that realization, that we were not in the physical center of the universe. and that was that we are not, in fact, the only sentient, intelligent life in the universe. And so therefore, there was a time approaching with the church when they were going to have to reconfigure their basic geographic understanding of the place of our human family in the universe. So he called them together. They spent a week there in conference with all of them. And then Pope Benedict instructed Father Jose Gabriel Funes, a Jesuit priest who was the director of the Pontifical Observatory, to go back into Rome and from the Vatican itself, in the press room, to issue a public statement. And the public statement was issued on the 10th of November of 2009 and went public basically on the 11th, and in which they said the following. They said, in light of the discovery of more and more of these new exoplanets by the spaceborne telescopes, the Planck telescope, the Hubble telescope, and what was upcoming was the James Webb telescope, that in light of the discovery of more and more of these new exoplanets, it has now become clear that much sooner than had been previously anticipated, our human family is going to be discovering the existence of life elsewhere in the universe. Therefore, the time has arrived for the commencement of an extremely important set of conversations addressing the profound philosophical and theological questions that are presented to our human family by the discovery of life elsewhere in the universe. And so when that statement was issued, in my capacity as the former general counsel of the Jesuit Social Ministry Office, what I did is I reached out, I contacted Father Jose Gabriel Funes
Mhm.
within the first 2 minutes of our conversation. He said, look, Dan, look, we're not talking here about discovering some single cell life form under some frozen sea on some distant moon of a planet in some far off galaxy. We're talking about another highly intelligent, highly technologically developed, but distinctly non-human species right here in our Milky Way galaxy. And so I took it upon myself at that point to start figuring out how I would be able to assist in facilitating the convening of this set of conversations among our people that we have to have in order to adjust to this. And so that has brought me since that time up to this point now, where I am fortunately participating in helping to nominate the individuals who are going to make up a 9-member board of review that is going to be appointed by President Biden at the beginning of 2024 to extract from every single one of the U.S. military services and every one of the 18 intelligence agencies and all of the agencies and departments of the Defense Department, as well as the U.S. government contractors who have any information whatsoever about the UFO phenomenon and the potential existence of extraterrestrial or non-human intelligence that is operating these UFOs. And that they're going to be, all of these agencies are going to be required to turn over this information to this board. And the board is going to be obligated pursuant to it's Amendment 797 of the National Defense Authorization Act. That's going to be enacted on December 22nd of 2023. And within 45 days of the passage of the act, we have to submit, there's a list of us, have to submit nominations to President Biden. And he's going to nominate people of his choice to the United States Senate, just as they would a Supreme Court justice. And there's 9 of them, just like there's 9 justices of the Supreme Court. This new board is going to be the unidentified anomalous phenomenon records review board. And they are going to be mandated by law as of December 22nd of 2023 to publicly release this information. All information that was obtained more than 25 years ago is going to have to be released within the first 180 days. And the rest of the information, if there is an application to postpone public revelation of it, it has to be justified to the president. And this board is going to operate over a 7-year period to establish what the statute calls the controlled disclosure
Mm.
to the world of the information that is in the possession of the United States government pertaining to the UFO phenomenon and the existence of extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional life. So we've entered into that period where, and I'm fortunate enough to be one of the people that's been tasked to make these nominations.
What is the criteria for your decision on to nominate somebody for like, this is a big deal,
This is a
deal.
very big deal.
Yeah.
This is a very big deal.
How do you choose them? How do you nominate? What's the process?
The statute, the draft of the statute actually sets forth some criteria. One of the people has to be, at least one person has to be either a past or current national security official. One of the at least one member has to be either a past or present member of the Foreign Service, diplomatic services. One of them has to be a scientist. One of them has to be an historian.
Hmm.
And one of them has to be an economist. And one of them has to be a philosopher. They don't have any theologians on there yet, but they have two additional openings of wild cards, and so that I've tendered the nominations of 9 people that I'm trying now to get a consensus among other groups, even though the naming of who is to nominate these people in the statute refers to the UAP Disclosure Foundation. We own the domains on the UAP the Disclosure Foundation, but that our organization is the New Paradigm Institute.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that at the beginning. So, New Paradigm Institute. One of your missions, or your mission, is to set forth a new worldview.
That's right. Is to discern the new worldview that our human family is going to have to give rise to in order to accommodate this extraordinary reality that up until this point in time, all of the fundamentally operative worldviews of our human family are almost all predicated upon the presumption that our human species, Homo sapien, is the only sentient, intelligent life form in our universe. They actually believe that the entire physical universe exists just as a stage on which to play out the drama of the unfolding of consciousness in our own particular species, from the primordial slime up to traveling into the stars, and that's what's going on in the universe. Well, that's a pretty profound misperception. And we have to adjust that. And yet at the same time, we don't want to have our human family go through the experience that was encountered by primitive tribes, like on a small Pacific island in the 1950s, that had no contact with the outside world, and all of a sudden discovering that there's this gigantic civilization going on out all around them, because their entire culture and civilization collapsed, in the face of how parochial and limited their visions were. And so that we don't want that experience to happen to our human family, so that we need to prepare for this. And so that's the conversation that the Catholic Church is asked to have begin. It's the same conversation that I tried to have with Senator Jacob Javits back in 1963 when I was 18 years old. It's the same conversation that all great theologians and philosophers and metaphysicians have to engage in to try to understand the relationship between infinite and eternal and unconditioned consciousness and our particular biophysical experience that we're having right now.
So I grew up Catholic as well, culturally Catholic, Italian background. So like Irish background, it's bred into you. Um,
Mhm.
but if you ask the questions, simply is, well, Jesus and the angels were all ETs. Why is it that we can't believe that the ET exists apart from what we're taught in Sunday school or in elementary school? It's all part of the same phenomenon if that exists. So then the question is, I'm sorry, I'm oversimplifying it, but
Yep.
the question is, why don't we ask these questions? Why haven't we been learning to ask these kinds of questions to begin with? If the Catholic Church is already there.
Well, one of the problems is that the Catholic Church, primarily following the Council of Nicaea,
Hmm.
has adopted a kind of an institutional bias whereby they have chosen to try to insert themselves. The priests in the hierarchy have attempted to insert themselves between the individual and the actual transcendent experience.
Right, right.
That they try to limit the access to the transcendent experience to the monks and trained people in the church, and have them exercise the decision-making authority over morals and everything for everybody else.
Very
Now,
political model. Yeah.
yeah, at a point in time when 99.9% of all the people in the world, basically were illiterate.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, didn't travel more than 50 miles away from the place where they were born. One might, theoretically at least, grant to those who had made these kind of decisions a certain leeway
Sure.
in thinking that they may have been better qualified to go through this process and to enunciate what kind of principles ought to be followed by average people. But the reality is that doesn't obtain any longer. That you have a much better educated people that are well traveled. They have access to different cultures of the planet. And so the bottom line is that we're now at a stage, so there has to be a great revision of the thinking of the Catholic Church. There needs to be a great revision of the thinking of the secular culture that obtains on our planet. We have to go we have to reevaluate our economics, our philosophies, our theologies.
Right.
This is a profound juncture in our human history. In that what I want to do is to assist and facilitate and participate to the extent to which I'm allowed to in this process. And I think that we all have to do this. We all want to engage in this process, and I think that we have to invite people in, not just the scholars and the theologians and the philosophers and the economists, but what's happening right now is this board. This is called the Unidentified Anomalous Phenomenon Records Review Board.
This board
That's
of nine that we discussed.
that's the
Yep.
board of 9
Mhm.
that's going to be called. In that they are going to extract all of this information under the power of subpoena power and with contempt of court, contempt of Congress authority to extract this information from all the different U.S. government agencies and contractors and bring it into their possession and share it with the Congress
And
for the first time.
how do we ensure that they are in fact retrieving and collecting all the information they need to?
That's going to be one of their challenges, is what type of a protocol they're going to develop to make sure they get it all,
Hmm.
uh, and that they have the power to investigate, they have the power to issue subpoenas, they have the power to interrogate people under oath, and what that our new Paradigm Institute is now been given an office in Washington D.C. on Capitol Hill. It's the only civilian. It's the only non-government entity that is located inside the federal enclave, actually on Capitol Hill, that covers all the House and Senate office buildings and the Congressional building and the United States Supreme Court. We are right immediately next door to the United States Supreme Court,
Wow.
between them and the Russell Senate office building. And that we are going to be engaged on behalf of the citizens in riding shotgun or as serving as a watchdog, a citizen watchdog over this process.
You must
Uh,
be a huge irritant to those who don't want an open process.
Well, but we're not the only ones that are irritating them.
Mhm.
There are all kinds of people inside the government structures that want this information shared, and that there are people at all walks of life that want this shared.
Sure.
So fortunately, it's not just us. What I want to be able to do is I want to be able to maintain as positive a working relationship as we can with the people who are harboring this information, and to try to get them to understand that this can be either a painful and confrontational process, or it can be a cooperative process, and one that's constructive for our human family. But this is going to go on over a period of probably 7 years.
Hmm.
There's a sunset clause on this board, or 7 years from the time that it's stood up. And when you see that happen in a piece of legislation in Congress, you know that that's what they're planning, is they're going to stretch this process over that period of time. And they're going to be trying to protect what they view as the sort of crown jewels of this secret, for as long as they can. We're going to endeavor to try to get as much of this out as carefully and as constructively as we can. And there's going to be a big load of information that's going to come out right with it. Well, the agencies, the intelligence agencies and military agencies and everyone in the private corporations, like Lockheed Martin and all these that have this information, have 300 days from the passage of the statute to organize it all and structure it and build indices and ways for retrieval of all this, and then provide it to this board. And then the board has, within the first 180 days, they have to release all of the information that has been obtained 25 years ago or more.
Or more.
Uh,
Oh, it's great. Or more, going back to whenever it is the record start.
well, that's right. Well, they go actually back to January 1st of 1945. It's
Right.
in the statute. Okay, so it
Yeah.
tells when it is they have to reveal this. Okay, and so this is an extraordinary process that virtually nobody in the country realizes is going on, because I'm not exactly certain why they think there has to be this kind of stealth process going on. But the bottom line is that as a people's advocate,
Hmm.
my responsibility is to share this information with people, to know that this is happening right now, and that there's a process that's going on. So I am attempting to get other 501c3 public interest groups and religious communities and others, social justice groups, to participate in telling me who they think ought to be nominated for this panel.
Allow me here to spread a little bit of a wider net for the information for the listener, because we've been putting stuff together as we've been growing the podcast, and had more and more interesting conversations with people. We've been educated on the Luis Elizondo case with ATIP through prior guest Leslie Kane, who was one of the journalists that broke 2017. We were educated by Diana Pasolka, who's also been on this podcast, about many things, including the case of John Mack.
Yes.
Those are two cases I had no idea until a few weeks ago, actually. So we reached out to you, not having any clue that you were involved directly in those cases. But uh, again, this is not about giving you praise, but in essence, kind of for a reason I'm going to, I think, explain in just a moment. Just a moment. Luis Elizondo was part of a secret program funded in secret for a number of years. Came out in 2017 through an article written by Leslie Kane. So he shared with her He was her source, and he has been a source of ridicule, fame, infamy, everything. You represented him,
Yes, I
John,
do. I represent it.
and you
Yeah.
still do.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is John Mack, and John Mack was very high level here for the listener. He was an esteemed professor, tenure professor at Harvard, who's a psychiatrist. Realized that there was something about this extraterrestrial thing and people's experiences, and started to delve into it and realize, this stuff may in fact be true. And Harvard tried to fire him. They ridiculed him, mocked him, tried to fire him, and then you were involved in the case of reinstating or protecting his status as a professor.
I was his attorney
You were,
throughout the entire hearing process. They dragged him up in front of a tribunal, and I represented it in front of that tribunal.
and you won.
And we won. Yes.
Only for him to pass away soon thereafter in an accident.
He was, we won. Actually, it was in 1994. He passed away in 2004 that he was hit by a drunken taxi cab driver in London.
10 years later. Okay.
And I served with him during that 10-year period as legal counsel to the group he set up called the Project for Extraordinary Experience Research in Cambridge.
Okay. That I did not know. I'll write that down. So you were involved in these cases, and I'll have you speak about Luis Elizondo if you want in just a moment too, because that's also fascinating. But these are people who have come out amongst many, and who have taken the brunt because there were people who came out early,
Mm.
and so they have suffered. They suffered and have been suffering a lot of turmoil in their lives, but they decided to do it for reasons that are not about financial gain or economic success.
That is definitely right. Yep.
So that's why they're also very interesting for me to understand more about. So this is not about you. This is about you being involved with people who are fighting an uphill battle for the sake of truth that they have been uncovering.
It's always true. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not about me or even about our institute, but it's about the people
Yeah.
who have chosen to step forward and to try to help our human family and bring information to our human family. Whether it's Lou Elizondo or Dr. John Mack or Dan Ellsberg
Mhm.
or Stacy Lynn Merck, who was the young woman that I represented from the American Sanctuary Movement that was attempting to help people flee death squads in Central America. It's just like Tony Abergon and Martha Honey, who basically attempted to expose the off-the-shelf enterprise of Oliver North and the smuggling of cocaine into the United States. I mean, these are heroes in their own right, and what they need is they need an advocate. They need someone who can help frame and articulate their effort and overcome the obstacles that are strewn in their path by the forces of against change.
That is what this is about. I believe the forces against change are really about fighting shattering beliefs or
Yes,
holding on to beliefs
that's right.
to be shattered. I,
In power, the arrangement of power on the planet, as everyone knows, is extraordinarily out of balance. You have less than 1% of the people among the entire human population, that own and control, so almost 40% to 50% of all the resources on the planet.
yeah,
In our indulging themselves to the point of wanting to have yachts and in private jets and everything else, while other people's children are dying of starvation. So I mean, to state the obvious, and so that that we all are called upon to do something to change that situation. And you have an option of doing it extraordinarily incrementally, one tiny bit at a time, while millions of people over time continue to perish in the
yeah,
face of injustice. Or you can try to accelerate that and bring about some major structural changes. And that's what the Jesuit order is dedicated to, is to disassembling the structural sources of injustice
yeah.
on the planet, both in Eastern and Western culture.
It's the
That's
disassemblers. It's the disassemblers that always pay. This is also a problem.
Yeah.
So how do the question is, how do you have enough disassemblers where the consequences where there are no longer consequences that are severe?
Well,
What's the tipping point?
well, the basic lesson is that there isn't any way to avoid
Mm,
the reaction on the part of the forces of reaction against people who are attempting to disassemble their structures. And so, what I try to do in counseling of people like this is to try to also get them to participate in trying to reestablish some other structures to which we can move. Okay, so it isn't just disassembling the structures of injustice, it's trying to reassemble an alternative set of structures on which people can rely.
mm,
And that's the paradigm. The new paradigm that we're working on is attempting to identify a set of normative principles and guidelines and structures, juridical in nature, the governmental in nature, that can replace the ones that are presently operative and that are denying the existence of an extraterrestrial civilization, that are denying the existence of the ability of our human family to reach these transcendent states of consciousness, that are trying to deny the ability of the majority of people to participate in decisions governing their own lives. That these forces of reaction are permanent, and there is some value. Let's be clear. There's some value in a conservative set of values that preserve order, that preserve, protection of traditions, etc. But the bottom line is there's an inclination on the part of institutions and structures to hold on to old ideas
mm,
well beyond their utility.
yeah.
And that's what we're experiencing. So our job is to be able to start to disassemble those dysfunctional sources of power, but at the same time to replace them with more functional structures of power that serve the ends of justice. And that's, to state it clearly, that's what we do. We did it at Jesuit headquarters. We set up the Christic Institute that functioned for 20 years that did the Karen Silkwood case, did the Iran-Contra case, exposing the off-the-shelf enterprise. We did the 3 Mile Island litigation that stopped the construction of nuclear power plants with the Silkwood case. We prosecuted the Ku Klux Klan and the American Nazi Party down in Greensboro, North Carolina, that gunned down labor organizers. We represented the first elected black mayor in the deep delta of Mississippi, against a false charge of first-degree murder. We do all of these kind of cases
Little things that happens.
over the years, which are attempting to shine a light on
Right.
the unjust nature
Right.
of a given structure. But at the same time, we're engaged in the positive elucidation of alternatives. That's what we're engaged in. Like, for example, today, when we get done here, I have to review a whole set. We're developing a whole set of policies for the 2028 uh, uh, presidential and senatorial and congressional campaign to set forth a whole set of policies for all, as I said, 15 of the United States cabinet level positions in all 8 of the major federal agencies that we're going to share with all political candidates, from all parties, and to say, look at this, these are the kind of policies that need to be followed, independent of the immediately upcoming election that's going to go on between, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, in the 3 Senate seats that the Republicans are trying to take away from the Democrats, and the 5 Republican House seats that the Democrats are trying to take away from the
Mhm.
Republicans. What we're doing is taking kind of a longer view of this. What we have that 5-year plan for moving into place a progressive agenda for a government in waiting. That's what we have. And at the same time, we're working with the UAP uh, Records Review Board over a 7-year period to expose the information that our government knows about the extraterrestrial civilization, and at the same time trying to develop an alternative worldview, a new paradigm worldview that is professionally crafted, that deals with all of the salient elements of power,
Mhm.
the economics, the philosophy, the theology, the social psychology that's involved. These are all sophisticated issues that need to be addressed. So that's what that our Romero Institute is doing now. The Romeo Institute is the institute that replaced Christic. The Christic Institute that we did all those other cases for, George Bush Sr., upon having lost the 1992 election, ordered the revocation of our 501c3 tax-exempt charter of the Christic Institute
Wow.
because we had done the Iran-Contra case. We did the Iran-Contra case that exposed George Bush Sr. And all of the cadre around him
Tried to
of
stick
having
it to you.
of having been involved in the illegal shipment of cocaine and heroin and assassination programs, etc. And so that they fell from power. And he knew that we had been meeting with Ross Perot. Ross Perot was the one that caused George Bush to lose the election.
Yep.
People don't recall that, Bill Clinton won the election in 1992 with only 43% of the popular
Split
vote.
that vote. Split the
It was Ross Perot, and George Bush Sr. blamed that on me, actually, because I happened to be flying around with Ross Perot and explaining to him what the off-the-shelf enterprise was, and he came to believe that George Bush Sr. should not be elected for a second term. And so that so we've been involved in those kind of activities for years. In that this stage we're in right now, we're both developing a progressive agenda for the government in waiting in 2028, and we're working with the panel that is going to be revealing the available information about the UFOs and the extraterrestrial civilization.
Mhm.
These are major things that we're working on, and people can contact us at the Romero Institute. It's easy, it's romeroinstitute.org. And it sets forth all the stuff that we're engaged in doing right now.
Well, we'll put that all in the show notes. So I should have actually introduced that in your bio, but we'll put all the websites. So the Daniel P. Sheehan, so your website, Daniel P. Sheehan, RomeroInstitute.org, LakotaLaw.org as well, and NewParadigmProject.org. We'll put that in the show notes.
Sure.
This has been eye-opening, fascinating to say the least. I would like I would like to have you back on in the future, maybe
Sure.
as we move forward in your at least in your congressional activities too. Um, I want to close it off with one last question to you, a question that we like to ask our guests. What is greatness to you?
Greatness is, I think, being able to transcend the kind of immediate instinctual motives that we have to maximize our own personal pleasures and satisfactions in those of our immediate family members, to transcend that into a perception of the same levels of affection and compassion that you feel toward your immediate loved ones to all of the members of our human family, and to other living things. And now we're at the stage of having to expand that into the universe. Whether we really need to understand that we're all sentient beings. We're all engaged in this process of the infinite and eternal and unconditioned consciousness that abides at the core of our sentient being, into back into unification with the infinite and eternal. That's the task that is underway. And in the meantime, we have to try to share our life with others, and help in every way that we possibly can without damaging people, killing people, maiming people, inflicting any kind of immediate physical pain upon people. But it does entail pressure on people. It does entail making the comfortable uncomfortable, and realize that they will retaliate, and they will utilize the instruments of power to try to punish those who do that. If there's any one message that has been conveyed to us by the prophets, it is certainly that the institutions of power will retaliate against those who try to change the power structure. And that's why they need good lawyers.
Like that, like it. There's still time to change career though. Eh?
Well, I'm assuming that will come about. hopefully, within my lifetime, that we'll get a chance to actually sit down and meet with the people from an extraterrestrial civilization and get some of their insights on this as well. They may have had a few billion years more
Yeah,
than
more.
you reflect upon these issues.
Well, we've had Avi Loeb here on the podcast as well, and that's one of his wishes. An astrophysicist from your alma mater.
Yeah.
I'll close up with this because you and I, in the last chat we had, I was learning quite a bit, and you had shared a little bit about what you used to think about as a kid when you wanted to be an astronaut, looking up at the stars, and you said how strange it is what we do to ourselves down here. And then
Mm.
you finished off with this quote. We were kind of riffing back and forth, mostly you and me listening, but you said, and I'll leave it at this. What we do to each other is an unperceptive perspective. We make over parochial and short-sighted decisions. And I think that listening to you today in this discussion, and listener listening to you, I think that quote from you informs what we've learned about your work to date. So I thank you. Thank you for all your time.
Thank you, Luciano. I appreciate the opportunity to get to talk with everybody.
Hey, it's Enrico Colantoni here, actor, director, and dedicated napper. Like what you heard today, there's more to come. Make sure to subscribe to Behind Greatness and learn about our live events at inspirenorth.com. You'll also find links to our social media right on our website, so be sure to give us a like and follow. Until next time, stay inspired.